Hey everybody, welcome back to our next lesson here in our biblical narrative focal point. A little bit different setup today. Most of you probably have figured out already that I'm in quarantine because of COVID right now, so operating out of my house. So you get to actually see a different background rather than just my office today. But here we go. Today we are looking at the lesson of Moses and Pharaoh. That is the name of where we are at now. You may be familiar with this from your Sunday school days. If so, great. A lot of this might sound familiar, but if it's new to you, hey, that's all right too. No worries there. First thing we're going to do today is I'm going to have you put me on pause like normal, and along with your parents or with your families, do our normal high-low check-in. What's been going good, what maybe not been going so good, and do the opening prayer. Now, with my setup today, I can't show you the prayer, but I've included that in the email. So you'll have that there. So go ahead and put me on pause and do that. And now come on back. All right. So recap. We left off last time with Joseph having been sent off to Egypt and risen in command to be second in command in Egypt, where he's second only to Pharaoh. His entire family, his dad and his brothers and all of the household, comes from the land of Canaan down to Egypt, where they settle. And they settle in the land of Goshen, we hear it, which is just like this little settlement area that's part of Egypt. So that's the end of the book of Genesis and where things leave off. Now we move into the book of Exodus, the second book of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures. And that's where things are going to pick up today. Now, typically we consider this gap between the two books to be about 400 years, and it is 400 years-ish. It actually picks up a little bit before that 400-year mark with a little bit of narration. And then where we really pick up the story and get into the story is about 430-ish odd years later. So that's kind of where we are at. Now, in this gap, in this roughly 350-year gap, there, of course, is a new Pharaoh, because no one lives that long. And this new Pharaoh doesn't know Joseph, doesn't remember Joseph. He's kind of a jerk. Things don't go so great. The Israelites have multiplied a lot. There's like 2 million of them now. So there's, in some situations, the Egyptians actually think there's more of them than there are of us. And if they realize that things aren't going so good, they might join our enemies, or they might rise up against us, or they might take over, and that would be bad. So they enslave the Israelites. They work them hard. They work them so hard, in fact, that they think now they won't worry about things. They won't rise up against us. All kinds of problems will go on if they do that. So we're going to do that. In addition, the Pharaoh is still thinking, what can I do to make sure that there aren't any problems? And what if they rise up against us? That really seems to be a concern. So he comes up with this idea, well, maybe we'll have the midwives, those who come to deliver the babies. We'll tell them, if it's a girl that's born, that's okay, don't worry about it. But if it's a boy, kill the boy. And the midwives are like, yeah, we don't think so. It doesn't really work out very, very well in that regard. So that doesn't really happen. But in the middle of all this, then we have Moses is born. Moses is an Israelite, or a Hebrew, they're called. And you might remember the story that his parents hide him away for a few months. And then when it's clear that they can't do that anymore, they put him in a basket and they float him on down the river. And as that's going on, his older sister follows along, and they see that Pharaoh's daughter actually finds the basket and finds him, and his sister pops up and basically tricks Pharaoh's daughter into saying, hey, you probably need a woman to take care of this baby for you. And she runs off and gets their mom, and so Moses' mom gets to raise him anyway, which is kind of good. 40 years go by. Moses is raised in the house of Pharaoh, full of privilege. He's basically a prince, but the scripture does seem to indicate that it's still obvious that he's a Hebrew, or that he's an Israelite. So maybe there's some cultural appearance differences that show up. We don't really know what, but apparently that is still the case. Eventually, he sees an Egyptian who's picking on one of his fellow Hebrews, actually kills the Egyptian, and then gets scared, and he runs off into the desert. He basically runs away. He wanders around for a while, eventually ends up in a place called Midian, and where he finds the priest of Midian, marries one of his daughters, serves his father-in-law, who's named Jethro, by the way, serves as a shepherd. and 40 more years go by. So in the span of time, we've got a whole bunch of stuff going on, and we've got Moses, who's like the hero of our story, who but also is a murderer, by the way. Remember that. God uses imperfect people. Here we go again. And he's 80 years old now. Basically, when everything sort of picks up with us, he's already 80 years old. It happens when he basically, have you heard of Moses in the burning bush? You probably have. So Moses is out doing his whole shepherd thing, and we hear that God shows up in this burning bush, and which is a strange thing, but that's sort of what seems to happen. God shows up in the burning bush, and during all of this, we hear this various encounter. I want you to read now Exodus chapter 2, verses 23 through 24. This is when God shows up. And it's because God remembers something. God remembers the covenant that is made, and the promise made to Abraham all those centuries before. That promise that I will make you a great nation. So that's what God has been remembering as God hears the people. And then actually the whole burning bush thing is like a chapter later in chapter 3. God shows up as the burning bush. We hear in Exodus 3, verse 3, Moses sees the bush and he says, I must turn aside and look at this great sight, which is kind of a funny thing. But anyway, that's where things are picking up. Now with this, they have this back and forth encounter. God and Moses, they jam for a while. God tells Moses, I want you to go back to Egypt. Tell Pharaoh, let my people go. Moses is like, who am I that you're going to send me? And God's like, don't worry, I got your back. It'll be fine. But Moses says, well, okay, but if I go and I tell the people that God sent me, and they said, well, what is God's name? God just says, well, tell them I am what I am. And Moses is like, well, okay. Now they go back and forth for a while. Like 2.5 chapters, they're just bickering. It's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So what do you think? Is Moses really interested in doing this? Doesn't seem like it, does it? Probably not. But they go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then finally it reaches a climax, all this bickering, when Moses it tells God, I can't speak publicly. I'm not a good speaker. And what's really funny is the way that it's actually worded when he says that. You can read this in chapter 4, verse 10. Go ahead and read that and see just how eloquently Moses tells God, I'm not eloquent. I can't speak well. And but they go back and forth some more. It continues, and continues. I think God's actually getting kind of ticked off at Moses. In fact, his anger is burned against him. And finally, God tells Moses, fine, I'll send your brother Aaron. He'll be your speaker. I'll tell you what to say, you tell him what to say, and he'll speak for you. So that's what's going to happen. So now Moses is out of excuses. So Aaron shows up, and together with his brother, they head off to Egypt. Okay, now this is where things are going to pick up. I want you to start with chapter 5, Exodus chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. Go ahead and read that, and then talk about this together. When Moses first approaches Pharaoh, and gives Pharaoh God's message, how do things go? Do things get better or worse? Go ahead and talk about that. Write that down. Okay. Now I want you to fast forward just a little bit. Chapter 6, verses 1 through 9. We're going to go ahead and read that. Okay. At this point, now God and Moses sort of have a conversation. They kind of go back and forth. God reminds Moses of a lot of the stuff about the covenant, again, all the stuff they've already been talking about, and the stuff that we've been talking about back in Genesis, all of that's going on, especially the covenant with Abraham. God reminds Moses of all of that and says, now go tell the people. And so Moses tells the people, but they aren't really listening to him yet. They're kind of ticked off because of the whole first situation when Moses showed up for the first time and things got worse for him. So they're not really listening to him yet. Okay. From here, we're going to move into what's really sort of kind of the big thing. The story of the 10 plagues themselves. Now, Moses and Pharaoh have kind of gone back and forth. God is in on this as well. And now we're going to have displays of God's power so that Pharaoh and all the people of Egypt and all of the world will see the great power of God. We're going to kind of go from chapter 7, verses 14, all the way through 12:32, which is a really long period. Don't worry, we're not actually going to read it all, but this is the story of the 10 plagues. Now, if you want to read it, you can. It's lengthy, Or you could watch the Ten Commandments movie from back in the 50s starring Charlton Heston. Your parents can probably tell you it's really long. It's like 4 hours long, so it would take forever. But you can do that if you want to. But essentially, the story of the 10 plagues. Now, what we're going to do, I'm going to actually kind of talk you through it. So here's what happens. This is this whole 6+ chapters in a nutshell. I want you to remember, every single time God tells Moses, do this stuff. First thing that happens, Moses takes his staff, his shepherd's staff, hits the Nile. The water turns to blood, which is really gross. All the fish die, everything smells, and apparently this is the case all over Egypt. All the pools, all the lakes, all the wells, everything turns into blood, which is really, really gross. But Pharaoh says, hey, it's just a trick. I bet it can happen. Someone else could do it too. So he brings in his court magicians, and they make the problem worse. They don't fix it. They actually make it worse by doing this. And the whole thing lasts for like a week. And then Pharaoh's heart is hardened, and it's like, let my people go. And Pharaoh's still like, no. That's first plague. Plague number 2, frogs. Frogs everywhere. They come up out of the Nile. They cover the entire land. They go into the houses. They cover everything. Lots of frogs. And we're not talking nice, cuddly frogs like Kermit the Frog. It's like gross, smelly, nasty frogs all over the place. Pharaoh calls in his magicians again. Once more, they make the problem worse. They multiply it. They don't make it any better. They make the problem worse. Okay. At this point, Pharaoh's starting to get the bigger picture. So he calls in Moses, and he's like, okay, dude, we've got these issues. Why don't you pray to God and say, take the frogs away, and then I'll let the people go. So Moses is like, okay. He prays, the frogs go away, but Pharaoh changes his mind. Plague number 3. Gnats. Moses takes a stick and he hits the dust, and it'll turn into gnats. God tells Moses do this. So Moses does. And there are gnats everywhere, these pesky little bitty flies. The magicians can't even attempt to make things, they don't even try this time. They're like, hey, this is their God. This is Moses' God. We're not going to mess with this anymore. Maybe you should listen, Pharaoh. But do you think Pharaoh listens? No. The answer is no, he does not. Plague number 4. It's like the gnats get bigger. Now we have flies. Sort of the same situation as the gnats. They're just everywhere. Now at this point, Pharaoh finally says, okay, you want to go out in the wilderness and make your sacrifices. That's fine. You can do that, but stay here in Egypt and do it. And Moses is like, oh, no. We need to leave and go like a 3-day journey. We have to get far, far away so the sacrifices will be good. And Pharaoh's like, fine. If you pray that they go away, I'll let you do that. So Moses prays, the flies all go away, and Pharaoh once again changes his mind. He's fickle, isn't he? It's crazy. He just keeps doing it. Okay, plague number 5. We're almost at the halfway point now. A pestilence. If you've heard this word before, a pestilence is like a disease. Like a disease comes and strikes all of the livestock of the Egyptians, but not the Israelites. And the animals of the Egyptians all get really, really sick, and a lot of them die. With this, Pharaoh gets really, 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 really mad, but he still won't let the people go. Still not budging. Plague number 6. Now, this time God tells Moses, I want you to take dust, and I want you to throw it up in the air, and it'll blow all over the place, and everything it touches is going to develop boils. Now, boils are these nasty, like skin infections. They're really, really not cool. Moses does that. The boils happen. Pharaoh's heart is still hardened, and the same result. Still won't let the people go. At this point, okay, plague number 7. It's time to get serious. Fiery hail. Now, if you know what hail is, it's ice balls. It's like frozen rain, basically. Balls of ice that are falling from the sky. God somehow turns this balls of ice into fire. How does it work? I don't know, but that's the case. Moses warns all the people, hey, God's going to send this, so get your livestock inside. The people who do, it's good because their livestock are saved, but those who don't believe him, their livestock stay outside, they get killed and they die. They get killed and they die. Same thing, right? Okay. Great big hail. And it not only hurts everything it hits, but it also strips all the crops down. Things are bad now. At this point, now Pharaoh's finally like, oh man, things are bad. And he begs Moses to pray that it'll stop. Moses does. The hail stops. Pharaoh changes his mind yet again. Kind of the same thing over and over and over again, all right? Plague number 8, we're going to return back to insects again. Locusts. Think about a grasshopper. Now multiply it really big. humongous grasshopper that eats everything. You've probably heard of these. We actually have had these in America before. These locust plagues. I've never seen one, but I've heard of them in more recent history. So it does happen. These locusts cover the land. They eat every single piece of vegetation that hasn't been destroyed by the hail already. So it is gone. Like food supplies, crops, all that gone. With this, Pharaoh is getting really scared now at this point. He realizes that he has sinned against God, and he asks Moses to pray for him specifically, not just that the plagues will stop, but like, pray for me now, Moses. Moses does, he prays, a wind comes up, all the locusts blow away, and yet again, Pharaoh decides, change my mind, not going to do it. Nope, not going to do what you ask. Now we're to plague number 9. Darkness. We hear that darkness covers the land. Darkness that is so thick you can physically feel it. Now, I don't know what it means to feel darkness, but that sounds pretty drastic to me. And that happens. Now, finally, at this point, Pharaoh says, okay, you can go and worship. You can go out in the wilderness. You can go your 3-day journey. You can do all of that, but you got to leave your livestock here. And Moses is like, no, we need the livestock because we have to make sacrifices. So we have to take them with us. And so once again, Pharaoh's like, nope, I guess not. Nope, can't go. Also at this point, Pharaoh changes his tune ever so slightly, and he tells Moses, you need to leave. If I see you again, I'm going to kill you. You will die if I see you again. So now things are getting like heated in addition. So we've reached the last plague, plague number 10. You might know what it is. The death of the firstborn. For those of you who went through communion instruction a couple of years ago, you might remember this because we talked about this. If this is new for you, though, that's okay. The death of the firstborn. This is a time that's called Passover, or something that establishes Passover. And we hear about this particular part in Exodus 12, 1 through 27. Now, this describes the Passover and the 10th plague. We're not going to read it unless you want to. You certainly can if you want to, but don't feel that you have to. But this is where it comes through. Basically, what happens is the angel of death comes through, passes through the land, and a lot of people die. But then a lot of people live, too. The Israelite people live, because the whole idea of the Passover is they take a lamb, and they kill it, and they prepare the meal with it, and they also take the blood of the lamb and they put it over their doors, their door frames. They paint it over their doors, and when the angel sees that house with the blood, it passes over the house, pass over. You see where the name comes from, Passover. Okay. We'll also get into that more next year. This is a 1-year advance. When we start talking about Holy Communion, we'll talk about this more. So this won't be the only time we ever talk about that particular situation, but that's the 10th plague. That is the final plague right there. So now, with the death of the firstborn, finally, Pharaoh relents and lets the people go. He's like, fine, take your people and go. You're free. I set you free, so go. I want you to read now chapter 12, verses 33 through 42. This is when the people leave. So go ahead and read that. Okay, now this is the point where the people leave in this great big mass group, like this mass exodus. That's where the name comes from. Crazy, right? Yep, there you go. Okay, so they leave, but Pharaoh's not done changing his mind yet. And they aren't very far away yet. They're actually still in the general vicinity. And what have we learned about Pharaoh so far? He's stubborn, right? He doesn't like to, he doesn't want to let the people go, and he's really good at changing his mind. Like, he tries to get what he wants, and then he changes his mind. So we see that again. I want you now to read 14 verses 5 through 10. We see that Pharaoh has changed his mind again, and he's like, wait, what are we thinking? Let's go get him. And so the army chases after him. Now I want you to read chapter 14, verses 15 through 31. Go ahead and put me on pause and do that. This is the people at the Red Sea. We see that that God is with the people again and delivers them. So finally, after a lot of stuff happens, we find that God has delivered the people. As we close this up, so in this opening portion of Exodus and all of this that we've covered, and I know in a pretty lengthy discussion here, I've thrown a lot at you, we see a new beginning for the people. But it comes through a lot of suffering. A lot of suffering happened ahead of time and in the midst of it, and even death. So we have suffering and death, and yet God brings a new beginning out of it. So here's a question. Have we heard this type of thing before? And if so, when? As we wrap up now, I know I threw a lot at you. What do you think was the most dramatic part of this story? Of what you might remember from the story, what you read, all of that. What seems to be the most dramatic? What seems to be the strangest thing? What part is like, whoa, I can't believe that sort of happened? And now here's a thought question. I want you to talk about this. No right, no wrong answers. Just tell me what you think. Does this seem like good news to you? Does it seem like bad news to you? And why? Why do you think that? As we wrap this up today, we find that God takes this specific cultural group, this specific group of people, even if they're a large group, and he frees them from a bad situation. God takes action when he sees a cultural group suffering injustice. Now, why do you think God took issue with their situation? What do you think? Again, no wrong answers. I just want to know what you think. Do you think that God continues to take issues with similar injustices in the world now? Or is this a one-time thing, or does it still keep happening? And if it does keep happening, then how should we react when we see injustice happening as well? With that, if you have any thoughts or questions or comments, things that you want to share, feel free to record those as well. Send those off to me. Sorry, this one got pretty long. The Ten Commandments is a big story, and there was a lot to cover there. So look forward to hearing from you.